Welcome to the webinar on working conditions in the private security industry. Those of you who may not know me, I'm Charlie Mayne. I'm a member of the industry pillar. I run a security company in the Kurdistan region of Iraq. I've done that since 2006, and I've been on the board, ICoCA board, for 5 years. Previous incarnations include a short period in Costa Rica, a bit of time in Baghdad with an American security company, some time with the Royal Marines, and various other sidelines that I've carried out. What we're going to be discussing today is key to what we all do, what PSCs do, and what the association's remit is, and that's about working conditions in the private security industry. From a personal perspective, there's been some frustration on my part that over the years since I've been involved in commercial space since 2000, there has been a continued sort of down pressure on pay general in the sector. I think that's inevitable with a service that has ultimately become commoditized. But I think we're going to hear some talks from an excellent panel who are going to illuminate some of the broader strategic impacts, the wider impacts of what happens when working conditions aren't good enough or remuneration isn't fair, and the sort of trickle-down effects, and then the potential ripple effects that can cause very real human rights abuses, ones that potentially aren't specifically visible, but ones that manifest themselves in family life and the actual, the broader influence circles of where your security personnel live. And so hopefully we'll also touch on some of the mechanisms that possibly clients and PSCs and other stakeholders should be thinking about when they're considering the working conditions within security, because like everything, it's not simple. And also like everything, if cost is always the defining feature of the delivery, then eventually something's got to give. And unfortunately at this point, within the security industry, we're approaching a point where we are experiencing a situation where guards and other security personnel are simply given no option but to take jobs where they simply, it's not even close to a living wage. And there are tremendous ripple effects on that. So what I'd like to do is start with Dr. Amanda Chisholm. She is Amanda is an associate professor in the School of Security Studies at King's College London. Her research and teaching focuses upon the racialized and gendered aspects of the privatization of warfare and security, with specific attention to how race and gender inform recruitment practices and labor management of global security workforces. Dr. Chisholm's research can be found in numerous international journals and edited book volumes. Her most recent publication is a book, The Gendered and Colonial Lives of Gurkhas in Private Security from Military Markets. It's a fantastic and very interesting perspective that I certainly was really unaware of, and having read some of Dr. Chisholm's research, I can recommend it. And over to you, Amanda, to enlighten us all. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlie. I'm just going to take a moment to share my screen with everyone, and I'm hoping everyone can hear me okay. Yeah, can everyone see that screen fine? Oh, can you see my notes, or can you see, what can you see?
See your notes.
You can see your notes at the moment, yep, if you just go to full screen.
Okay. So, yeah, so I want to thank everyone and thank members of ICoCA for actually making this discussion happen. We've agreed, I think, to talk for about 10 minutes. So this is going to be a whirlwind whistle stop tour of my research and some of the broader trends. And just a brief introduction, I guess, of me. I'm a political ethnographer, so my research really arises from sustained field work in Afghanistan, in Nepal, in the UAE, Qatar, and then the UK. And it also comes from detailed interviews with over 180 stakeholders, including security contractors themselves, security managers, recruitment agents, and families back home. So this is a combination of research that's over a decade. So again, thank you, and hopefully you'll find the topic itself quite interesting. Yeah, so I think the main contribution, I think what I'm trying to make to about the industry, private military and security companies, is that the market itself is predicated on one that's racialized and structured through colonial legacies. And so what does that mean? Well, for me, that means logics of race and gender fundamentally shape how security contractors come into market relations and how they're valued as contractors themselves. And so it doesn't only shape, the hierarchies of workforces from the what's considered the highly skilled Western contractor to more of the naturalized global South contractor. But it also shows the fundamental role the families also play within the global security industry. And the colonial logics, what they do is then they separate this out, right? So it separates out in a space where we actually don't consider families back home to be active stakeholders and contributors within the private markets. But my research shows that they fundamentally, perform a key role in making the markets work as they do. These are just some of the 7 trends that I feel have arisen through my research. And these are more kind of global trends themselves. And the first is, and it's hard to see the screen because I can see everyone else, all the participants. Can I zoom down that? Oh, perfect. Okay. So the first and foremost for me is that emotional labor is core to how security work is done. And often this is generally unacknowledged. We don't look at the ways in which contractors themselves, one of their core functions is to make clients feel safe. And they make clients feel safe through a variety of different nature of their work, from, standing in front of buildings, so clients feel like the building is being protected, to, generally Westerners will write intelligence briefings, standard operating procedures, but also the emotional kind of pastoral work that generally global South contractors do in making cups of tea, in asking clients how their days are. These are all, fundamentally shape the experience for clients and the sense of well-being that clients have in Afghanistan or in Qatar or the UAE, for example. So this is one of the key findings I found. Another finding I found, particularly with global South workers, is there's a broader hyper-regulation of their work-life balance, which actually undermines workers' opportunities to form emotional bonds or friendships, or even kind of the connections they have back home that make them resilient at their job. Majority of the people I talked to, first and foremost, just understood their primary role and their value were just to work to exhaustion. When I was researching security contractors in Qatar, most of them would work 6 days a week, and the 7th day would just be to do laundry and rest. So there's a hyper-regulation of work, but also in Afghanistan, there was a hyper-regulation of global South contractors' ability to move around Kabul, for example. Their eating times, their sleeping times were also very highly regulated. And why I think this is important is it also works to exhaust workers and deplete workers of their ability to regenerate themselves as human beings to continue to do the work they do. And I also think this also leads to a higher turnover rate of security contractors too, because of the hyper-regulation of work that they experience. Almost every security worker that I spoke to, regardless of if they're working in armed environments or not, have paid for work. And so they've paid local brokers within their country of origin to access the market itself. And so I think this is really important, because then a lot of workers already come to the work site in what, ILO and Amnesty has called debt bondage, right? They owe extortionate amounts of money to brokers and agents back home that employers might not be immediately aware of, but certainly shape the experience of how, how they connect to their work, their anxieties and stress levels. I think this links to the broader kind of colonial structures of the global market itself, in that, or how the market benefits from these colonial structures, in that primarily where security companies are recruiting from in global south workforces is generally a space where everyday life of these workers and their families are predicated with such a high degree of uncertainty over, where their next meal is going to be, how they're going to afford their school fee, or children's school fees, and all of that. And this sort of precarity around life-sustaining activities continue to be the main driver for why families and security contractors sought foreign security work as a way of a hope out of these precarious position itself. Gender as well as education level had certainly a direct bearing on families and migrants' abilities to negotiate what fees they paid for with the brokers to access this foreign employment itself. Finding 6 was, again, families play a vital role in sustaining a resilient workforce. So they're not the benevolent, grateful benefactors of market relations, but they fundamentally engage in these market transactions in brokering, a deal to get their son or husband or brother often into foreign security work, and as well as keeping life going in the family front at home, the reproductive work that they do around the household. And what I mean by that is the caring for the children, elderly, broader community engagement, and connecting the migrant workers back home so they do feel still connected even though they're not physically present, enables these security workers to invest in the work that they do. And it also enables, sometimes contracts, security workers are gone for over 2 years before they get to go home to see their loved ones again. And so the role that the families play fundamentally enable the market to extract the sort of security labor they do, and to also demand the particular conditions and nature of that work that they do. So I think when we bring the families in as key stakeholders, then it also highlights, there's a certain ethical obligation that, security companies have to families as well, that, there's a reciprocity that families aren't just getting the money that the workers are bringing back home, but they're fundamentally also contributing to the profits of the security industry itself in how it designs its labor forces. The final one was what I found particularly in Qatar, but a little bit in Afghanistan, is that there was some training and upskilling of particularly security workforces that didn't have extensive military or policing backgrounds, but yet still ended up doing security work. And the training that was done, you did see, you saw the material implications in the workers themselves, that they felt like they were being valued. They felt that, there was investment and skill being put into them as individuals, and they were happier in their work site, which, it seems a bit common sense. The more you invest in your workers, the more you get out of them. But this training still remained quite ad hoc, and it wasn't really institutionalized, and it was really performed by a few key, security managers that took it upon themselves to invest. So those are the general kind of trends that I found throughout my fieldwork, and I'm sure my panelists after me will pick up on a few of those and maybe give a bit more of discussion around them. But moving on to, I guess, the labor experiences of global contractors. I mean, I think Eddie in particular will talk about, the poorly paid nature of their work, the de-skilling of these predominantly men's work, how that de-skilling leads to the cheapening of them and cheapening of the value of who they are as security contractors, and the profound impact that has on them and their families. The two things I really want to focus on here, though, is kind of the nature of the security work and the hidden, invisible work that is being done by predominantly Global South workforces. And that is what, feminist political economists call the dirty work of the industry. And by dirty work, it means the thankless, exhausting work, emotional work in making clients feel safe. And part of this making clients feel safe is not only the conjuring up a pleasant disposition, even when you don't want to smiling. And by smiling and by appearing friendly, you create more of an atmosphere of calmingness, right? That this has put a lot on Global South workforces to do the role of creating a positive, calming atmosphere in some environments that are very high stress and high anxiety for everyone involved. And another particular part of the creating that sort of atmosphere is, what Whitney, a feminist political economist, calls being the waste disposal. And that is being the person that other people can let off steam onto. So there are so many times I've witnessed and talked through, particularly Global South contractors being yelled at, being, verbally abused, being belittled, jokes made about them, and them having to just stand there and feel like they have to take it, that they can't emotionally respond. And where that becomes really important is, again, that leads to the wearing out and depletion of these men and, of their connections with their families. And I think it's an important labor that we need to acknowledge. And by acknowledging it, then we also need to, I think, do something about it as an industry. Think about how we can, not only offer physical protection to the workers, but also that broader kind of emotional protection. And then, I already mentioned about the highly regulated work, little time for rest or leisure, restricted mobility, and debt bondage, all kind of are markers of the experiences of the Global South contractors that I spoke to. And again, it leads to a broader depletion of their ability to regenerate themselves emotionally, spiritually, and physically in order to do the sort of work that they need to do, which again leads to a higher turnover rate of contractors. I think I just want to highlight here again, specifically the role that the household plays in these market relations themselves. And these are just a few examples, of the work that these predominantly women do. And not just women in the Global South. These are also spouses I've talked to who are spouses of, Western contractors who do security work as well in the global industry. That they're performing fundamental concrete roles in order for, again, the market to function as it does. And they have a clear stakehold in how, the market controls and manages its global labor forces as well too. So they're a key labor point as well that just often gets rendered invisible or understood as, they're benefactors of the industry as opposed to active engagers in it. I'm conscious of time, so again, I'm happy to pick up more on question and answer, but these are just, I guess, a few recommendations that I would have for security companies and recruitment companies themselves, when they're thinking about how can we better manage our workforces in a ethically and fair, responsible way. And so for security companies, for me, it would be to acknowledge what's already seen as invisible labor that fundamentally also shapes the industry, and that is emotional work that security contractors do, and how that emotional work lands a little bit differently, and how often workers from the global south are absorb much more of the negative emotional work and have to take on much more of this emotional work than Western contractors, and then what that means for them and their ability to do their work. Again, think about ethical recruitment and management of your workforce, and that it's at the core of your business, and to really move away from a race to the bottom to find the cheapest source of labor. I think it ends up probably costing you more money in the end, with a high turnover rate of workforces and having to pay recruitment fees more regularly, but also there's a moral obligation I think we have, for people who make the industry, make your company what it is, to actually invest in them in ethically responsible ways. And a key to this, there are some companies already out there doing important pioneering work around this, is to take ownership of your entire labor security chain. And if you hire or use local recruitment companies in insight countries to do SNAP audits with them, to ensure that they are adhering to the same sort of ethical standards that you've set out in how to recruit and manage your workforces. And then again, invest in regular training to upskill, these security contractors themselves. I felt a lot of them felt really devalued in doing the demeaning, what they understood as demeaning and banal work of the industry, but just when they feel that they're being professionally valued and developed, that this has profound impact in their ability to, to perform their security work. So I think I will stop there. I hope that made sense to everyone. I'm happy to take questions, or we can wait until the end of the seminars or the talk.
Thanks a lot, Amanda. That was excellent, and I think it illuminated some very interesting perspectives that some people may not be aware of, or at least that we don't probably give enough thought to. We will come back to some questions and answers at the end, but what I'm going to do at this point is I'm going to introduce Temi, just to make sure we keep on. Temi Uenlui is a senior consultant within the Crisis and Security Consulting Department in Control Risks. She's responsible for providing security risk and vulnerability assessments, crisis management, emergency response plans, and risk mitigation strategies. Prior to Control Risks, Temi worked with an African-focused risk management company in different functions, including information and data research, operations, audit, and compliance. A substantial part of her role was helping the company achieve ISO 9001 and 18788 certifications within 1 year. She holds a BSc in Physiology from Olabisi Onabanjo University, Nigeria, and is working towards an MSc in Security and Risk Management at the University of Leicester. Temi's going to be touching on some examples to do with her own work, which will also highlight some of the issues that we're all aware of and cognizant of around employment in the security industry. Temi, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Charlie, for the introduction. And I believe this is a very important topic, and I'm so glad that ICoCA is exploring the working conditions of private security guards. So let me just share my screen. Okay, I hope we can all see my screen. Perfect. So these my conversation will be focused on 4 key areas. I'll be talking about the importance of having this discussion, because I believe it's long overdue, and we do need to start looking into the working conditions of our private security guards, our drivers, and other operatives that work within the private security industry. I would share case studies from on-the-ground assessment we've conducted all across Africa, We have colleagues in Senegal, Nairobi, South Africa. So we do bring in that on the ground information that we can share on this panel. We'll see 3 different cases, one from Mauritania, one from Nairobi, and another one in Nigeria where I'm sat. And we'll talk about fundamental challenges that these PSCs do face in their operating environment and how it directly impacts on the working conditions of their staff. We'll also discuss or touch on strategies that we could possibly adopt to make sure that we can change the narrative moving forward. So firstly, why is it important to talk about the working conditions of PSCs? Number one, it is an important conversation to have. It's the right thing to do. We have so many international organizations come up with articles, conventions, best practices, and standards that should be adhered to. But the reality is that PSCs are not obligated to adapt to those strategies. They are not obligated to become signatories of bodies like the UN Global Compact or ICoCA. In theory, they look good on paper. In theory, you see policies, you see procedures that shows their commitment to ensuring that their guards or their operatives are, they have good and safe working conditions. In theory, they show their commitment to train their guards, to pay them good wages, to make sure that they have access to medical insurance or compensation. But that's not usually the reality. The reality is that they do the barest minimum just to get their license to operate. And then the licensing organizations, there is also a responsibility on them because they only usually check the documentations. For example, the regulatory body in Nigeria, they go to all these PSAs upon onboarding to make sure that they have things in places. They have training schools, the standards, the courses they are training their guards are what is required according to international best practice, but that's how it ends. You look at the license renewal process, and you see that they don't really check, they don't really inspect. I mean, we have thousands and thousands of PSCs springing up, just meeting the regulations, just making sure that they're incorporated. They have directors that are former military, just ticking the box really. But when you go straight down and you speak with guards that is deployed, maybe in the Niger Delta region or up north in Maiduguri or in Mombasa or in Mauritania, and you have one-on-one conversations with these guards, you see that they were literally like taken off the streets, given uniforms and assigned posts. Sometimes it's just because they want to make sure that they have enough foot on ground. They can demonstrate to clients that they have the capability to support in such and such locations, but they are not really drilling down to training these guards, to equipping these guards, and to supporting them. In certain situations, you see guards that are working in high-risk environments, and they are alone. They don't have additional or remote support. These guards are expected to protect.
Sorry, Tammy, just to very quickly interject. I think if you could put your presentation in full screen.
Oh, okay.
Don't worry if you can't, but at the moment we can kind of see 2 of your slides.
Oh, I see.
So if you go into display settings, and then you may be able to see it in the display settings at the top.
Okay. Let me see what's happening here.
Don't worry about it too much. Sorry, Tammy. I thought it was a kind of an easy fix. I wasn't trying to.
Okay, is it better
there
now?
We go. Perfect.
Wonderful.
Yep, awesome.
So
Thanks.
I was using 2 screens, so I lost one of the screens. So that's why. Okay, so it's back. And then the reality is that client organizations also do not go that extra level to make sure that the PSCs that are carrying out security works on their behalf actually meet international practices, international standards. So they just check the documentation, and if it looks good on paper, they just award the contracts. But what we also need to realize is that there's risk associated with not going the extra mile to ensure that your guards receive the training, are treated properly, are being paid good wages. So we look at ESG, which is a topic that everybody is talking about. And in particular, the social risk associated with the private security companies. So you'll find that most of these guards are taken from local communities. They are sourced from local communities by PSAs just to meet that obligation, because they do need to operate within the communities, and they have to show their commitments to the development and the growth of that community. But in situations where the guards are not treated fairly, it then degenerates into incidents. You see the community protesting the unfair treatment of their indigents. They protest, and sometimes they go as far as blockades and site occupation, violent site occupation, just because the guards are not treated well. Now, the consequence on the business is that there is operational disruptions, there's going to be brand and reputational risk. And on a broader level, you then look at the sustainability of that business to work within that environment. Now, these are very important conversations that clients should be having with PSAs to ensure that PSAs that are interacting with communities on their behalf, they do adhere to best practices that has been set up by international bodies. So here we have case studies taken from different places. So in the first one, you see that the guards are not even provided with proper ergonomic guard posts. These guards just have a shed with aluminum roof, and they're exposed to inclement weather conditions, and they're still expected to continue to deliver their service. They're still expected to carry out access controls. Now, under the Scotch song, we find that some of these guards just go to the nearest biggest tree, even if it's far away from their beat post, and they just take shelter there. Sometimes these guards don't even have access to water, something as basic as water, and they do have to go away from that location for a while just to get water. In the second slide, you see guards that have been provided with a porter cabin that has been designed to accommodate them as a post. But if you look at the floor, you'll see that it's broken. It's not ideal. And in these instances, the guards actually told us they've killed several snakes, scorpions, and other biological hazards. And these are things that guards are exposed to. And coupled with that, it's the low income that they are earning. So the situation we have in Nigeria is so dire, such that guards actually tell the guarding companies that they would not work 24 hours. They would not work 12-hour shifts because they don't earn enough, and they need to source alternative ways of making money. So you see a guard go on a 24-hour shift with one guarding company, and his second job is with another guarding company. And after coming off a 24-hour shift, is going to his next job and is working maybe another 12-hour shifts. Oftentimes, these guards don't even live close to their duty posts. They don't live close. And in Kenya, you find that they have to walk from where they live, which is far away. They have to walk from their houses to their beat post. And of course, when they get over there, they would be exhausted, as you can see in the last post. This was taken 8 a.m. in the morning, and you can see that the guard has dozed off. He was unaware of his environment. Now, these are cases we see on a regular basis when we do these assessments constantly, and it's high time to start having that conversation. Now, from a PSC perspective, they then tell you that they have some challenges that they face on a regular basis. And the first is social economic factors. Number one, we all know the impact that the COVID pandemic has had on economies globally. Most organizations are having to adopt cost-saving measures just to make sure that they continue to operate within their environment. Now, these, of course, these leads to reduction in operational costs, such as salary cuts, low welfare packages, and I already talked about the high attrition rates of the guard force due to low salaries that they are earning. And of course, operatives working double shift just to make sure that they can make it up. What they don't get from a company, they can make it up in other ways. And another thing that this exposes clients to is the risk of corruption. So oftentimes, right, you see guards colluding with external threats, and they are being paid just to look the other way. Now, these are things that our clients are constantly exposed to. Another challenge that they have is the market share. We know that the guarding company, it's a high volume, low margin industry. So there are lots and lots of guard companies springing up, or PSAs springing up. And in order to win contracts, they bid low. And at the end of the day, we do tell our clients that at the end of the day, you pay what you get for. You cannot pay below minimum wage and expect guards to give you like premium services. And this is also, some clients talk about the value perception they have of guards is very, very low. They just believe, oh, what's a guard going to do? It's just there at the gates. They don't really look at the value and the impact that these guards do have on their companies. And of course, they also have budgetary constraints to resourcing the security function. Now, we already spoke about some of the direct impacts that this has. So the quality of guards that you do have will be very, very low. Their experience level is low because of the high attrition rate. We see PSCs having to just pick anyone and give them the bare minimum, just maybe 2 weeks training, or 2 weeks training is even like very much. Sometimes you just have maybe 3 days training. And funny enough, right? So we look at guards and we ask them for their guarding instructions, their codes of conduct, and all you see are documents that stipulates fines, that, oh, if you don't get to work early, you'll be fined such and such amounts. It's just not proper. This is not, guards don't even know what they are supposed to do. They just know, oh, I just need to show up from work and then hand over to the next person. They are not aware of other things that they should be bringing onto the table, or what is expected of them. They work excessive shift lengths. And of course, there are occupational hazards such as lone walking, minimal remote support, incident management and response. It's almost non-existent in some cases. And what we propose in terms of what we propose in form of moving forward is that we need to identify stakeholders and let stakeholders know their responsibilities. The first is the contracting entity themselves, the client. The client needs to go the extra mile to conduct due diligence checks to make sure that the guards that, or the PSCs that they are entrusting the security function of their assets are up to standard. They need to do that duty of care to provide a safe and working environment for the guards that are posted to their side. It's a shared responsibility at the end of the day, because oftentimes when incidents happen, it's on both guarding company and client company that have the reputational risk, the risk to reputational damage. So we need to take it a step further and ensure that there are KPIs, key performance indices, that are set for guarding companies that they must adhere to, and it should be agreed upon from the contractual states. Contracting entities should set the requirements for recruitment, for training, induction training, retraining, and making sure that their guards are well equipped in line with the threat environment. You have to make sure that it is commensurate to the threats of where you're, the solutions being preferred is commensurate to the threat of that operating environment. And PSCs also They need to go further by ensuring clear messaging regarding their commitment to providing good working conditions for their employees. Most times, PSs just post their guards to different sites and don't even bother to check up on them. And you find that it's a client that is calling to say, oh, such and such guard that was posted here did not resume for duty. And you see that disconnect because the guarding company are not even aware of what their guards are doing. There is minimal supervision. So they need to step up and take responsibility as well. And then the licensing and the regulatory bodies, these are the people that determines whether you have the license to operate as a PSC in such and such environment. They need to do thorough investigation during the initial license issuance to make sure that it's not just what is written on paper, that there is proof to back it up. There is evidence to show that if I say I have, for example, a training facility for my guards, and I organize trainings on a biannual basis or a quarterly basis to make sure that my guards, they remain conversant with best practices, then the onus really is on the licensing and regulatory bodies to make sure that that is what is that is what is happening. And of course, there should be, sporadic or spot checks and audits to make sure that non-conformities are identified. What we usually see are issues relating to maybe their corporation of certification has expired, or one or two other things that do not even have any impact on the working conditions of the guards themselves. We need to ensure that it's part of what PSAs are expected to provide. And of course, international organizations like ICoCA and UDHR, we need to make sure that the policies that we're putting out there, the best practices that we're putting out there is commensurate to each environment, because what you have in Europe is different from what you would have in the Middle East, and it's also probably different from what you'll have in Africa. So it needs to be fit for purpose, and there should be continuous awareness and stakeholder engagement. And that's why this is actually a very great thing that we're discussing these issues. And yeah, I think
Thanks, Tammy.
I've been able to cover that in the short time that I have.
Great. So that was a fantastic insight into the challenges, if you like, of monitoring guards, etc., on the ground. And thank you for those images. Very interesting. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to move on to Eddie Stam. Eddie is a grassroots Dutch unionist and campaigner who started his professional union career 30 years ago in the Netherlands. Through regional, national, and European work, he became global head of UNI's Private Security and Cleaning Department. UNI is a multi-sectoral global union federation, GUF, representing 130 national unions in private security and cleaning in 77 countries with over 1 million members. Eddie is a global union interlocutor of allied Universal G4S, Securitas, Loomis, and ISS, and also GUF representative for the private security sector to the government of Qatar. In his present capacity, he has traveled to and met with security guards with union representations and their employers on all continents. Eddie, you have the floor. Thank you. So I think you might be on mute, Eddie.
Yes.
There we go.
I prepared so well, but then it's always the mute button that that's in our way. Okay, well, let me, I don't know what I could add to these two excellent and very broad contributions, but let me start with security guards belong to the lowest paid professionals in the formal economy in most countries around the world. Salaries are on or just above the local minimum wages, sometimes even under the legal minimum wage. And these minimum wages in many countries are not really a living wage. I call them professionals, but in many countries, they classify them as unskilled labor. This is enhanced by companies recruiting just anybody who fit the uniform with a minimum of training. Of course, we can partially blame ourselves as trade unions, not to be able to elevate this profession. Out of the sector's global workforce, only an estimated 5% is organized in a union. But it's also a very complicated sector to organize, given the often paramilitary kind of organization in many, for instance, Latin American countries, but also in Asia, there's hard pushback against unionization. And even without this pushback, the geographical spread and low numbers work against us. If you want to speak to many security guards in most geographies, you have to do a lot of traveling. Another cause of low wages is the low entry level, causing very tough competition. Where clients often reward the lowest bid, it is hard for a company to raise the standard without pricing itself out of the market. And the way we look at it, raising standards should not be controversial. It's in the interest of clients, security company, and the employees. We have made a showcase in Kenya, where we found a small union in 2013. It was basically the private security guards guarding the American embassy, and they had a union for themselves, which is now the Kenyan National Private Security Workers Union, and it has over 100,000 members, and it is a force in economy. They lobbied together with crucial employers for a National Private Security Act and an overseeing authority. And although you could make a lot of remarks of things still going wrong, but it ruled out a lot of bottom feeders on the more relevant contracts. And we're trying to copy that model into Zambia at the moment. But first, to do so, we first have to build a union that is relevant enough. In the EU, we take part in the development of the CEN norms for the sector, which are mostly focused on critical infrastructure. So we're also discussing, like, how can we expand the conception of what is critical infrastructure? I mean, if there's terrorists, they don't care what, they can take a shopping mall or train station or whatever. So what is actually critical infrastructure? And the pandemic learned us that there's other critical factors too. We are part of the social dialogue with the European Employers Federation, where we discuss these matters. And we do research on retention. We have a big project at the moment running, which, I mean, retention is a problem for employers, but also for us, because if they leave their job, they leave us too. We developed a best value guide for public procurement, where there's tools in this guide where you can consider social standards in a transparent way within the bidding procedure without violating competition law. But I must say, we did that manual, but it takes a lot to get it implemented and to get procurement officers to really take it into consideration. At the end of the day, the lowest price is still ruling. We do make progress in raising standards, but there are still large parts of the world where we are still on level 0 because we don't have enough strong unions. There are several levels of influence, and that is minimal legal requirements, as I said, the Kenya example, industry standards, client demands, market standards endorsed by clients and security companies, and of course, sectoral collective agreements. An extra could be internal ESG standards if it wasn't for the fact that compliance is hard if it beats you out of the market. So speaking to an ICoCA audience, I consider the code to be one of the industry standards. Other standards are previously discussed, like CEN and ISO, and the sectoral code of conduct promoted by the International Security League. They are all pretty weak. Recently, I had an argument with ISO about a very unfair warning and termination procedure with an ISO certification on it. And ISO just refuses any discussion about it, and they move the responsibility to the certifier and to the certificate holder. Codes of conduct are mostly the product of self-regulation and seldom enforceable. To specific agreements in a market might be specific agreements in a market might be conflicting with competition law. Sectoral collective agreements are enforceable, excluded from legal restrictions in competition law, and a great instrument to raise standards. The right to form a union and to negotiate a collective agreement are derived from ILO Conventions 87 and 98, and they are generally considered as basic human rights. Still, private security providers cannot guarantee these rights in every area of their work. Even the ones who confirm these rights in an agreement with us, we often have to poke. And in my view, private security employers and their organizations, decent clients, multi-stakeholder organizations as yourself, and we should do everything to raise the standard, because together we can. The right to form a union, the right to bargain collectively, a living wage, decent standards on training, working hours, available PPEs should be self-evident and not an impossible demand that you have to negotiate on. But in practice, we have to. Your code was initiated out of the Montreux document and therefore very much focused on uncontrolled armed forces and shady operations in post-crisis areas. Nothing wrong with that. It needed to be done. But it addresses niches of the industry while the core still has its own defects. Therefore, I plead strongly for a beefier paragraph on workers' rights. The strongest competitors should win on standards, not on how far they can squeeze their workers. A race to the top is better for all than an ongoing race to the bottom. And I think getting into one of the previous speakers on Qatar, where I'm involved too, we took an example there. One company, will not mention the name, and any resemblance to a real company might be coincidental, but one company, and we checked just one issue: recruitment fees. And last Monday, the students who did the research presented the result, and it's opening a gateway for negotiations, how we can fix this problem, not today, not tomorrow, but it takes time because it's a complex problem. And actually, I'm talking with the Ministry of Labor in Qatar and saying, hey, generally speaking, there is three things. When you come in, you have to pay. When you are there, you have no say. And if you want to leave, you get kicked out in a nasty way. And these three things have to be resolved. And that's complex. That's a long-term job. And we are committed to that. But we are in a big advantage in Qatar because we have dialogue with the government and they actually listen to us to an extent. And I think much more government should be open for fair procurement. I would like to introduce our manual on fair procurement to the Qatar government too, and to other governments, and they should set an example. It cannot be that notorious violators of human rights get big contracts from the EU or from the US government or from the Norwegian government or whoever. They should be excluded from these big contracts. But still, that doesn't happen because at the end of the day, the atmosphere in public policies is the cheapest will win, and that's not a good atmosphere. And we have to change that with raising the standards together. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Eddie. That was really excellent and pulled together some of the key points that we've seen being brought out. You mentioned recruitment fees, clients' responsibilities, worker rights, low value issues around guard forces, etc. So thank you for that. It was really good. I guess from your experience, what would you say is, you touched on many of them, but if you were to pull out one thing that you would urge clients and PSCs to do, that they could do to improve worker relations, what do you think that might be?
You're asking me?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, well, it's very hard to talk to clients. For us, it's very hard to talk to clients because there's always this territorial thing. Often we're not even allowed to go on the terrain of clients. But I would say exposing clients who are going for the cheapest, it has proven to be a working strategy in one of my previous jobs when I was representing the cleaners in the Netherlands. But it's very difficult because the client will say, it's not our responsibility. We have a contract. Your partner to fight with is the cleaning company or the security company, but not us. But at the end of the day, in Netherlands, there was an initiative called Responsible Market Conduct. And it has about, I think, 1,800 signatories across the markets. So it's signatories from cleaning companies, security companies, clients, big clients. And it was initiated by Schiphol Airport, Amsterdam Airport, and the Dutch Railways, because every time we were doing actions, we were targeting the airport and the railways, and they got a bit sick and tired of it. So they started this initiative. And it is working. I mean, it's not perfect, but it's working. It's one more instrument.
Thank you very much for that. That's great. So I don't forget, maybe you could drop a link, if you have one, to your best value guide, the fair procurement guide. Potentially, I think most of the attendees would like to have a look at that. And on that, ICoCA will soon be launching a procurement guide for clients. And just to quickly touch on some of the commentary in the Q&A and also the chat, we're very much focused on that. You know, we don't think that this is a fixable problem from the PSC perspective. We are actively engaging with clients and attempting to leverage government support, the support of all the pillars, in order to change the narrative on this, to highlight the issues around employment. So, just introducing Mark Dees. Last but most certainly not least, sorry. I think all of us in the virtual, one moment, I've got the wrong bit. That's your question, Mark. 1 second. Mark Dees is a group senior manager within the corporate real estate risk and compliance team at Flutter Entertainment. He's also board director of the International Professional Security Association, overseeing memberships and mental health awareness. He came into the security industry over 20 years ago as a retail security officer. He then moved into corporate security and has supported clients in many different environments. This has given Mark a strategic and operational understanding of working conditions for security officers. He has taken this experience into his role as the director of IPSA, where he has been working to create a one-voice approach that has introduced initiatives focused on really understanding and, where possible, improving working conditions for frontline personnel.
Thank you, Charlie. And yes, it's my privilege to be part of such a great panel, and the discussion that we're covering today, I think, is very, very meaningful to certainly all of our members, and hopefully with us all collaborating together, we can actually make some change and really push this message forward. So without further ado, so yes, IPSA is the International Professional Security Association, and we are a membership association, and we have a digital application to reach out to our frontline members. So those frontline people are the security officers, the security guards, actually working these long hours that we've previously been discussing, and obviously working in these environments that are very challenging in some respects. So what are our members telling us? So what I'm going to go through is some sample views from 3,500 of our frontline members. And I just want to give you, I suppose, a bit of a landscape as to what that looks like. So 84% of our membership is under the age of 50 years old. And again, I've put in this slide here. You can see the age demographic just there. But 8% of that membership consists of female members, and 80% defining as male. And that again would represent, certainly from a UK point of view, the split of gender within the private security industry. So with our membership and our application, we have what's known as a happy or not, to really try to get some viewpoint from our members as to how they feel on a day-to-day basis, whether at home, work, or personal with health. So from that, we had, from our responses, 39% of our members telling us that they had a bad day due to work. Some of that feedback that they've provided, I've captured below here, but just honing in on a couple of these items. So lack of experienced, trained staff means that I personally have to do more work to make up for the company's failings. experiencing bad senior leadership. And in terms of working shift patterns, so struggling for sleep before and after night shifts, and that's really starting to take effect. And one thing that's really coming through as well is that a lot of security members are saying that they're doing work that's non-security related. So again, what they're being asked to do more and more and more whilst in operation. And the last point here, just really around underpaid and under pressure to deliver. So I'm just going to focus on the UK market very quickly and just give an overview of where pay bandings sit currently. So in the UK, the national minimum wage will be increasing in April 22 to these gradings that you can see here. So from 18 to 20, the minimum wage will be £6.83 an hour. If you're 21 or 22, it'll go up to £9.18. And if you're 23 and over, then the minimum that the hourly rate will be is £9.50 per hour. In the UK, there's also the Living Wage Foundation. So this is an organisation that has analysed the true living cost within the UK, and they have forecasted for the same period of April 22 that the real living wage should be £9.90 outside of London being the capital, and then in London £11.05 an hour. So that factors in the true living cost to an individual. So again, using our data from our membership, 21% of our members are on less than £9.50 an hour, and 38% are between £9.51 and £11 an hour. But what we're also seeing is with these lower hourly rates, the amount of hours that the individual has to work per week has to increase, and they're on average a 56-hour working week. They're performing shift patterns that sees them working 6 or 7 days straight without having any time off. So really, to get to a decent family living wage, they're having to work those higher hours to bring that money. I just want to highlight some area of practice where in the Republic of Ireland, they have developed a sector driven process. So there's what's known as the Joint Labour Committee, and this is an independent body made up of equal numbers of employers and workers. And what they do is that they set the employment conditions and minimum rates of pay for employees in certain sectors, and obviously security being an example of that. So what this JLC, Joint Labour Committee, do is they draft what's known as an employment regulation order, and that is setting out those conditions, so those minimum rates of pay, and obviously the working conditions to meet that. This ERO is then put forward to the Labour Court, and then the Labour Court, if they agree with the terms that's drafted within that ERO, will then send that to the Minister of Enterprise, Trade and Employment, who will then give that statutory effect, which then becomes legally binding for that sector. So just, I suppose, a bit of an example of what one country has done to really try and support the workers within certain sectors. I think Eddie touched upon that qualifications, that the security officers in many countries are deemed as unskilled workers. But in many countries, to become a security officer, the individual has to undertake many hours of training before being allowed to actually work. Additionally, in some countries, there is the licensing requirement. So again, the UK, Republic of Ireland, and many other countries require that individual to hold a license, which then brings additional checks and additional costs to that individual. But what that does bring is a minimum level of training and a minimum standard that that individual should be following. 58% of our members hold a security license, and 17% of our members actually hold an advanced level of qualification. So by saying that they are deemed as unskilled workers, many of our members actually hold diplomas, masters, BAs, BScs through obviously their previous studies, whilst obviously being a security officer at the same time. The last point that I want to bring up in my session is around incidents. So again, we through our app, we have the ability to raise incidents that some of our officers are dealing with. 45% are either physically or verbally assaulted whilst undertaking their duties. And if they do raise these as concerns, less than half of our members reporting these incidents receive any support from their employers. Thank you, Charlie. That brings me to the end of my section.
Thank you very much, Mark. That was great, very interesting, and nice to see some data slides on there. I'm a big fan of some data, some evidence. I think all of us within a virtual room, you know, kind of understand the pressures there are on service and price, and how that can have an impact on quality. But with your experience, broad experience with actual contractors of security personnel in particular, I mean, what do you think is actually the issue there? Do you think it's clients who simply don't understand, they're not aware of the issues? Or do you think it's just a sort of contractual buffer, if you like, which allows them to say, you know, I've signed a contract with Acme Security, they promised to pay people properly, therefore it's just not my issue. So is it a flagrant disregard, or is it simply a lack of education?
Thank you, Charlie. A very good question, and unfortunately, I don't think there's a straightforward answer to that. Personally, I think the issues are a little from column A and a little from column B. So column A being that companies misunderstand the value of security. I would slightly expand that misunderstanding to incorporate the value a security company can bring to a purchaser of security services. So in many cases, I've been part of when a company is looking to procure security services, it is normally the procurement department leading that evaluation. And they are using a prescriptive input-based assessment to compare the cost that they previously paid on security services against the submissions of new suppliers using the same labor workforce requirement. So this model, I feel, is very limiting in how the security company can make any difference and win that new potential business. And this is where I think issues in column B come in, as the mindset may be, as long as the labor laws are abided to or local laws are followed, what the security company decides to pay their guards, or what training they receive, or what conditions the guards have to work in, are not the concern of the procurer of those services. However, if the procurer of those services used a more output-based model and allowed the security company to design a security solution for them, the labor requirement may be less, as more technology or dynamic response mechanisms could be used, but still meeting the requirements for the procurer. That then opens up more opportunity for the security company. So the pay, training, the working conditions of the labor requirement could be enhanced and more reflective of the importance that that labor element of the activity is delivering for that procurer. Those are my thoughts. Thank you for the question. I hope that answered.
Yeah, not unusually. It's a bit of grey, right? Somewhere in the middle. So I'm going to try and I'm going to open this up to the whole panel. I'm going to try and condense a number of the questions, you know, quite a few of which kind of overlap. I'm probably going to. I won't spoil it for you. I'll leave you in suspense as to which one I'm going to pick first. But feel free to volunteer if you feel it particularly resonates with you. Mark, you mentioned Ireland and the structure and the government regulations that they've put in place. That's kind of interesting, because on the chat and in the Q&A, we've had some questions and some commentary about who exactly is in charge of this. So, you know, there's been criticisms around PSCs, you know, and the race to the bottom, that it's driven intercompany companies that don't care, aren't compliant with codes or certifications. And we've talked about the clients, you know, flagrant disregard for the welfare of their guards, or is it just this sort of blindness to it? It's been suggested that ICoCA and other similar bodies could do more to impact the behavior of PSCs and influence clients. But I guess the real question for me is is where do we think the majority of this kind of responsibility sits? You know, does it sit at the government level? Is it the responsibility of PSCs? Is it clients who hold the responsibility for these issues? Or should it be ICoCA itself and other similar bodies who are doing more? So I guess Amanda maybe could pick up there first if you're happy to.
The panel will have something brilliant to say. I'm going to go with Mark's line here and say it's a bit of both or all of them that are involved. And I think when we look at security arrangements and I guess I want to thank the comments in the chat box that made me I just want to present the industry I'm focusing on largely is security work that's done in Afghanistan, Iraq, but also more in the Gulf more broadly. And it's the recruitment of global South workers. So there's a migration element, the economic migration element there. So I'm not dealing with what Tamiola was talking about is more local, or what Mark was talking about was more local too. But I think in those spaces, and as Eddie highlighted too, when you're talking about Qatar, when you're talking about Afghanistan, it immediately comes to mind with the Canadian embassy with 12 Nepali security guards that were killed in an IED attack on the way to protecting the embassy. And they, Canada hired a private security company to protect its embassy. These spaces highlight that everyone has an important role to play in protecting workers, in ensuring ethical standards. I talked to ethical recruitment companies and ethical security companies that I've worked with, all highlight what they find frustrating, and what was highlighted also in the chat box is they get priced out, right? And a broader race to the bottom. And they're calling for more clients, which are often the state, right? The state is often a client as well too, to have more technical compliance of a core ethical standards is written in the contract, right? So it's not just about price, but it's about meeting the technical capability that includes this, right? That includes a robust kind of demonstration that these companies are ethical in their recruitment and labor management, and demonstrate, the processes in place that they have to ensure reporting mechanisms of labor abuses, and that these laborers do have some sort of recourse and support. And until that happens, there is this frustration. I also think, returning to Canada, what I find interesting with the Canadian government is that I think it was last year or 2 years ago, there was a class action suit that was successfully, with the Nepali families, successfully sued the Canadian government for their negligence in handling the lead up to the death of these contractors. And my hope is this starts signaling, there's a risk involved here, right? So it's not just about passing the buck anymore, right? It's the company's responsibility. It's not the client's responsibility, right? Outsourcing that risk, but it really comes back on the client and the state. And I think that signposting, I guess, when we're trying to leverage, why we need to move to a race to the top, what Eddie calls, is to talk about risk. And ensure that, having that is another kind of leverage. But I've gone on too much, so I'll let the other panelists talk.
Eddie, maybe you'd like to make a short comment on that.
Yeah, well, lawsuits is one. I mean, we've been looking into that, and OECD complaints are another one that we've been using quite a lot, actually. So then you get the mediation mechanism and that sort of stuff. But it is, for us, it's not the real strategy, that it's like a supporting strategy, because the real strategy is build stronger unions and make sure that workers have a say. Sometimes you need the help of a lawsuit, but at the end of the day, I would say, if you get into a lawsuit with civil rights organizations or like class action kind of cases, you're kind of stupid as an employer, because you could have cut a deal with the union before, and then so I think at the end of the day, it's the responsibility of clients, governments, security companies and unions too, we have a responsibility to raise the standards, and we can use a lot of sideways, but at the end of the day, for us, it's about strong unions, because we know where unions are strong, there are the best conditions. If you look, for instance, the Scandinavian market, where the unions have high density, very high density, the rules are pretty tough, and the salaries are not as low as the lowest. So they push it up. Yeah, that's what I wanted to say.
Thanks, Eddie. It's kind of interesting. I'm just going to very quickly give a little bit of my own thoughts on that, in that, and not specifically on the question, but around unions, etc. The Iraq really isn't unionized at all, but we actively encourage group representation about working conditions within the company. And as you said, you know, it's kind of, for me, I don't understand why more companies potentially don't do it, because actually it leads to a much better early warning system. You find about the issues, you're able to manage it, and often people just need to feel like you actually care about the working conditions, and they accept that sometimes you're under tremendous commercial pressures to deliver a service, and that maybe you can't actually remunerate them better, but you know, listening to them, training them properly, giving them the right equipment, making sure they have the PPE, etc. That's absolutely key to minimizing churn, which in turn leads to operational efficiencies, which allow you to be more competitive against your competition. Anyway, that's my two tuppence worth.
If I can make a short comment on that, because actually we are forming joint committees in Qatar. We're pushing for that because we cannot have unions there for obvious reasons. They don't allow us, but we can have joint committees, something like you are talking about. But if you see the reluctance of employers to have these joint committees, the only ones that have joint committees are client pushed. So it's the FIFA who pushed it, it's the Qatar Foundation who pushed it, it's the North Atlantic College who pushed it. There are joint committees, the rest not. And so, I really don't understand the reluctance against it, because it's an ideal situation. It's not dangerous. It's not that you create some platform for total revolution or something, just a platform for dialogue with your workers. But there is a fear about it that I don't understand.
I'm sort of with you, Eddie. Tammy, just to circle back to the question quickly, is it, you know, is the most fault with the PSCs, the governing bodies, clients, or governments? Who should be providing the impetus here to sort of try and create a race to the top?
Okay, Charlie. So I would say that it's responsibilities on all their part. If you look at what I said in my last bit, I did mention each responsibility, each stakeholder having responsibility. So these doesn't just fall to the PSC or to the client, or even to association bodies like ICoCA. It's everyone. Everyone needs to understand that they do have a role to play in regulating private security companies and ensuring that they do maintain the international best practices and standards as well.
Thanks, that's great. Amanda, you did mention, touch on this slightly, but I'm going to go to another question from Simon Williams. So the kind of focus often when we talk about PSCs, it is about companies from the global south, but as you mentioned in particular, Tammy, about the sort of guards that come from the local area. I mean, what do you think the concepts can be done differently, or are they broadly sort of aligned? You know, what Amanda talked about, what we've all talked about, an investment in training, investment in regulations and procedures and oversight. Do you think there anything that differs between if you have a non-host country workforce or a host country workforce? Tammy? Sorry, I'm double.
Okay,
double
so
questions.
Can you take it again and be more specific so I know what's addressed to me and what's addressed to Amanda?
Yeah, sorry, it was Amanda it was a question that was sort of aimed about Amanda's presentation, where primarily it's focused on the global south workforce. But I was just interested from your experience, if you have anything specific to say about the differentiators with how you retain and how you make sure that your personnel are well looked after when dealing with local workers who are traveling to and from their families.
Oh, okay, perfect. So I believe that we need to change our strategies in recruitment. We need to look at conditions that would encourage either migration or making sure that families are well looked after. I believe that the onus just falls on the recruiting organizations. You'll see that sometimes the recruitment of these guards are outsourced to maybe HR firms, and they don't really understand the full scope of what's involved. So yes, there has to be interactions between recruitment companies, PSAs, and also the client. So again, the client do need to identify all the specific gaps, all these risks, and also require or request that certain criteria are met by the PSCs, and then they can cascade down to whoever is in charge of their recruitment or procurement as well.
Thanks, Tammy. So again, I'm going to kind of circle back around a sort of I guess, a general question that any of you can feel free to jump in on. But I think we've looked at and talked about the kind of how does poor employment practices, etc., low remuneration, below the living wage, how that has a kind of a ripple out effect. How that it's not just about well, this guy comes to work, so I must be paying him enough, right? You're dealing with people who are in a situation where they simply have no choice but to go to work for the rates they're being paid. So, and Amanda, you talked about the sort of the family and the additional support structures that allow for this type of working and the impact that they have. And I guess a sort of a question that I have is whether you think it might be possible to leverage that sort of situation to create a feeling of additional empathy, or to bring a sort of more of a focus from clients onto what actually happens when they're not treating their personnel well. For instance, if they're not providing sufficient welfare structures so that they can call home, if they're not making sure that their own staff are not abusing the workforce, they don't understand what they need to do, really. So I was wondering if you might have some interesting ideas on how we might be able to talk to our clients about the ripple effects.
Yeah, I think that's important. I think Eddie had mentioned before too, of making these people, right? They're not numbers. They're not kind of this abstract, monolithic global south, third country nationals, local nationals or whatnot, but they are people who invest in the security industry as a way to uplift them from poverty, as a way to support their families, as a way to enable a sense of professionalism in themselves, right? In performing a job that they can feel valued. And I think, yeah, anytime we can raise awareness of, rationalizing why people choose the security industry and why they put up with certain experiences or certain kind of conditions, I think is really important. I also want to highlight here too, and in particular my research in Qatar, that there is important gender distinction in security contractors and how they experience the industry, and how in particular, the labor camps are men stay at the labor camps. And whilst, part of the, this move for ethical recruitment is we open up and we look at the conditions of the labor camps, and now they're building labor camps that have more adequate space and leisure facilities and whatnot for people, workers, migrant workers, not just security industry, but, other workers who stay there. Women security contractors stay in what they call villas, which aren't really glamorous villas at all. Their, testimony was there's often 6 to 8 people packed into one bedroom that's really meant for 2 people, that in order to get to work on time, where the vehicle picks them up and takes them to whatever security site they're working on, they have to have group showers. 5 people hopping into the shower together in order to get dressed in time. They also have very strict, even on their off time, their day off, they still have to be out of the house by 10 o'clock so it can get clean 10 o'clock in the morning, but then they have to return before 7 o'clock at night because they get locked out if they don't, right? And so I think this is my appeal too, to also look at the industry as a gendered industry that significantly impact female security contractors and male security contractors differently. And this is just one way, to highlight that. And then, yeah, bringing in the family home, the family, there are some very tragic, emotionally loaded stories around, the sacrifice that the families have to endure just to keep life going, right? And the contractors themselves too, the being away from their families. Again, if we talk about Afghanistan, but also Qatar, 2 years away before they can return home to see their families. That's an incredibly long time, and the implications that has on communities back home, right? And so, yeah, I think the more we bring in these sort of hidden labor and the other stakeholders who are fundamentally shaping the industry, their life stories, how they come, treating them as rational human beings that are pulled into these relations for a variety of different reasons, then I think affect, I think when you tug at people's emotions and, and make it visceral, and move it away from stats. I know stats are great, Mark, thanks for the stats. But I think when you contextualize and move that away from the stats, I think it's emotion, right? That hold people and they remember that. So that's what I'm attempting to do too. But thanks for that point, Charlie.
Thanks a lot. And there's always space for quantitative and qualitative. I don't know, we're sort of drawing to the end of the webinar now. I don't know if anybody else, Mark or Eddie or Tammy, if you'd like to jump in on that, or whether you'd prefer that I just kind of wrap it up. I'm very open to any comment on that.
Yeah, I'd like to jump in on that. So what we see is that clients are increasingly becoming aware of all these other factors that do impact on their operatives. So they're beginning to put in measures in place to sort of give their operatives a soft landing. So you'll see some organizations where clients actually go the extra mile to pay their guards maybe compensation, which is outside of what they're being paid by the contracting guard force. And they also set up medical insurance for the families of the guards, up to maybe like 4 children. So you can, if you have 4 dependents, you can put them under the medical skills. They provide transportation for their guards just to, relieve the situation that they find themselves, because clients are aware of these low pay that the guards get at the end of the day, and they're just trying to make sure that their guards, the people that they entrust their assets, are well looked after. And oftentimes you see that some clients will tell the PSC how much they want the guards to be paid. We've had several situations like that in Nigeria as well. Thank you. All right, Charlie, that'll be all from me.
Thanks a lot, Tammy. That's excellent. Eddie, do you? Yep.
Yeah, there's one thing I wanted to add about the freedom of association. I mean, there is parts of the world where it's not uncommon that if you start a union, you start to get death threats, home visits, and that sort of stuff. I don't want to do a manual on union busting, but the worst kind of union busting in Latin America, Colombia, particular, by security companies, and the other thing is forming yellow unions next to the union to push them out. These things still happen, and it's on a quite regular basis. So that's a practice that should be stopped immediately. But it's a hard practice to kill, and especially, I think the military influence in the security companies is part of that, especially in Latin America. There's not a union culture in the military, so that's but it's sometimes terrible. People get terrified, and people even get killed. So that's what I wanted to add. And I want to apologize for my red face and walking around, but I got my jab yesterday, my 3rd jab, and I'm a bit feverish. So statistically, according to some sources, I could drop dead any moment, but I think I'm okay.
We can all drop dead any moment. That's for sure, Eddie. So I'm gonna wrap up from there. Thank you very much, Amanda. That was excellent. And Mark, fabulous. Eddie, some really interesting insights. I will just very quickly mention for the other people on the call that union, or the right to representation, is part of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It's Article 23. And so if you are union busting, then you are breaking a human right. There is no argument about that. Temi, really excellent. I'd like to thank you for ending there on quite a positive note. It's also my experience that I am seeing a growth in client responsibility, client understanding of the issues. There are clients out there, I think they increase slightly each year, who do actually want to do the right thing. I think it's important that we're trying to drive empathy around what people get paid. There was some procurement language forwarded from ICoCA that we drafted that could be used in proposals. And really what it's saying is, it's not okay. You're forcing people who have no choice but to work for unfair amounts of money, and you're doing it so you can save yourself a few bucks on your bottom line. You know, you wouldn't do it to your son, you wouldn't do it to your friends. They all have options. The people that you have on your front gate do not have options. So we will send that out after the webinar. And I'd also like to say there were a number of very ICoCA specific questions in the chat. I didn't want to lose the opportunity with the 4 excellent panelists. And so I have taken a note of all of those, and those will be answered, you know, in the coming few days. In general, hopefully we can answer some of those specific ICoCA questions. But also ICoCA in the new year will be releasing a client procurement guide, which we hope will provide an excellent handrail, clear, practicable way that you can present to your clients that will help them do their due diligence, help them ensure that they're contracting the right clients, as Amanda said, really focusing in to the human issues and the risks involved in not employing the right type of company. So I also think I'd like to say to the attendees, many of you are representatives of PSCs. This is the joint responsibility. You know, talk to your clients, be honest with them, tell them how you feel, tell them what you're putting into the chat box, explain that it's not okay to just let companies do what they want. You know, employees deserve to have insurance, they deserve to have sick pay, they deserve to have lots of things that we as you know, the lucky sort of 10% or whatever of the world just take for granted, you know, 5% of the world probably. So thank you all very much for your time. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. I hope everybody on the call has also enjoyed it. I've gone 4 minutes over. I do apologize for that, but I hope you all feel like it was worth it. So thank you very much, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your days. Thanks a lot. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you, Charlie. Bye, everyone.